My mother stood up at a crowded brunch restaurant in Boise, Idaho, lifted her full cup of coffee, and poured it slowly over my head in front of 11 family members and at least 20 other diners, saying, calmly, "Watch this. That's how we treat trash in this family." My name is Juniper Hale, 34 years old, and I want to explain the history behind that moment before I describe what happened afterward, because I think the specific context matters enormously to understanding both my mother's cruelty and my own response to it. 6 years earlier, I had discovered, while helping my grandmother organize her financial paperwork during a health scare, that my stepfather, Roland, had been systematically draining money from her retirement accounts for nearly 3 years, using power of attorney documents she'd signed years earlier without fully understanding their scope. I reported what I'd found to an elder abuse hotline, and the subsequent investigation resulted in Roland's criminal conviction and a court-ordered restitution plan that, while it never fully recovered everything he'd taken, at least stopped the ongoing theft and secured my grandmother's remaining care. My mother had never forgiven me for that report. I want to be honest that I understood, even at the time, that reporting my own stepfather would create genuine family fracture, but I hadn't anticipated the specific, sustained intensity of my mother's anger, an anger that had apparently, over 6 years, calcified into something considerably darker than ordinary family estrangement. That brunch had been organized by my Aunt Priscilla, my mother's sister, specifically framed as an attempt at family reconciliation, 6 years after Roland's conviction, with my grandmother's 90th birthday approaching and Priscilla genuinely hoping the extended family might find some path toward civility, if not full forgiveness. I want to describe what actually happened in the moments before my mother stood up, because I think it matters to understanding how deliberate and calculated her action actually was, rather than any impulsive, in-the-moment outburst. The conversation had turned, as it often did at these rare gatherings, toward a tense discussion about my grandmother's care arrangements, and I had simply, calmly stated that I still believed reporting Roland had been the right decision, given what the investigation had ultimately confirmed about the extent of the theft. My mother's response wasn't immediate rage. I want to be clear about that, because I think it matters to understanding the specific, chilling deliberateness of what followed. She sat quietly for a long moment, picked up her coffee cup, and stood, with a calm, controlled precision that made clear this wasn't a spontaneous loss of temper. I want to be honest about the physical sensation of that moment, lukewarm coffee soaking through my hair and down the back of my shirt, considerably less painful than the sheer, disorienting shock of understanding that my own mother had just deliberately, publicly humiliated me in front of a restaurant full of strangers and family members who sat in stunned, frozen silence. I want to describe what happened in the immediate aftermath, because I think it matters considerably to understanding how this story actually unfolded from that point forward. A restaurant manager approached our table within seconds, understandably concerned about the scene, and I want to be honest that in that specific moment, humiliated and disoriented, I made a decision I've thought about many times since. I stood up, calmly told the manager I was fine and didn't need any assistance beyond napkins, and walked out of that restaurant without saying another word to my mother. I sat in my car in the restaurant parking lot for nearly 20 minutes, coffee-soaked and shaking, before I felt composed enough to drive home, and I want to be honest that the emotion I felt most strongly in that parking lot wasn't sadness. It was a specific, clarifying anger that helped me understand, with a clarity I hadn't previously allowed myself, exactly how much longer I was willing to continue absorbing my mother's ongoing punishment for a decision I still believed, without any hesitation, had been the right one. I want to tell you what happened over the following weeks, because I think it matters considerably more than the incident itself. My Aunt Priscilla called me that same evening, deeply apologetic and clearly shaken by what she'd witnessed, explaining that several other family members had already reached out to her, horrified by what they'd seen, several of them explicitly stating, for what she told me was the first time in 6 years, that they believed my mother's ongoing anger toward me had crossed into something considerably more troubling than simple family disagreement. "I should have said something years ago," Priscilla told me. "I think we all quietly agreed you'd done the right thing reporting Roland, but nobody wanted to directly confront your mother about how she was treating you as a result. I'm sorry it took something this public and humiliating for any of us to actually say that clearly. I want to be honest about how I actually processed the following months, because I think it matters considerably to understanding how this story genuinely resolves, rather than offering a simple, tidy reconciliation that I don't believe would have been honest or healthy given everything that had happened. I made a deliberate decision. With the support of a therapist, I began seeing regularly in the weeks following that brunch to establish firm, clear boundaries with my mother going forward. I sent her a single, carefully composed message explaining that I would not be attending any future family gatherings where she was present unless she was willing to genuinely acknowledge, in a meaningful, sustained way, both the original harm of the public humiliation and the 6 years of ongoing punishment that had apparently led to it. I want to be honest that my mother's response, when it finally came 3 weeks later, fell considerably short of what genuine accountability might have looked like. She sent a brief message expressing that she felt I was overreacting and that families go through difficult moments, language that made clear she wasn't yet prepared to actually examine the severity of what she'd done or the years of anger underlying it. I want to describe how I've navigated the time since, because I think it matters considerably more than any single confrontation or apology. I have not spoken directly to my mother in the 8 months since that brunch, a decision that remains genuinely painful, layered with complicated grief for a relationship that, even at its best, was never entirely healthy, but that I still, in some complicated way, continue to mourn. My grandmother, remarkably, has become someone I've grown considerably closer to during this same period. Grateful in ways she's expressed directly and repeatedly for my willingness to report Roland's theft, understanding fully, unlike my mother, the genuine protection that decision provided her during a vulnerable period of her life. I want to tell you about a conversation I had with my grandmother roughly 6 months after the brunch incident, because I think it captures something important about how this story has actually continued to unfold. "I wish I could tell you your mother will come around," she said, holding my hand at her kitchen table. "But I've watched her carry this particular kind of anger for a long time now, longer than just these 6 years, if I'm being honest with myself. I don't know if she has it in her to actually look at it clearly. What I do know is that you did the right thing protecting me, and I will never, for one single day, regret that you did." I want to be honest about where I currently stand with this entire situation, because I think authentic resolution matters considerably more than a falsely tidy ending. I have not reconciled with my mother. I don't know if I ultimately will, and I've made a deliberate, ongoing decision not to force that outcome simply because reconciliation stories feel more satisfying than honest ones. What I have found, in the months since that brunch, is a considerably clearer understanding of my own boundaries, a strengthened relationship with my grandmother and several extended family members, who finally, openly acknowledged a pattern they'd previously stayed silent about, and a genuine, hard-won sense of peace with a decision I made 6 years ago that I have never once, despite everything it eventually cost me, regretted making. I think often about that restaurant, about coffee soaking through my hair while my mother stood over me with a calm, deliberate cruelty I still find difficult to fully process. But I think, more often now, about the parking lot afterward, about the specific, clarifying moment I understood that walking away, calmly and without giving her the reaction she seemed to be seeking, was its own form of quiet, necessary strength. I don't know what my relationship with my mother will look like in another 6 years. What I do know is that I finally, fully understand that protecting my own dignity doesn't require her forgiveness or understanding to be valid, and that some family relationships, however painful to accept, may simply require distance rather than the reconciliation we're often told every family story is supposed to end with. And if you or someone you know is navigating family estrangement or abuse, please consider reaching out to a licensed therapist or a support organization in your area. You deserve support, and you are not alone.